So here's a question for you. How many countries would a hacking group need to compromise before the rest of the world starts paying serious attention? 10, 20? How about 37? Because that's exactly what just happened. A newly uncovered state-backed espionage group operating out of Asia has infiltrated government networks across 37 countries in just the past year. And they were scanning infrastructure in 155 other countries while they were at it. One out of every 5 nations on Earth had a critical breach from this single group. And that's not even the only thing we're talking about today. We've got a CVSS 9.9 vulnerability in BeyondTrust's remote access tool. Yeah, remote access tool. It's the golden goose of hacking to have that high of level, especially when you're talking about like an access tool. A state-sponsored campaign hijacking signal accounts of European politicians and military officials without using a single line of malware, CISA ordering federal agencies to rip out their outdated edge devices, and a ransomware gang claiming that they stole 1.4 terabytes from the company that literally guards the world's data vaults. Let's jump into it.
Forge OS is online and operational. Welcome, operator.
Hey guys, I'm your host cipherceval. Welcome to Exploit Brokers by Forgebound Research. This is HN episode 61. If you're watching on YouTube, go ahead and smash that like button, hit the subscribe, and ring the bell notification icon so you don't miss an episode. And if you're listening on Spotify or Apple Podcast, I really would appreciate a follow and a 5-star rating. It goes a long way in helping other people find the show. Okay, let's go into it. First story, we are talking about shadow campaigns. So the first story, it is a big one, and it comes from Palo Alto's network's Unit 42 Threat Intelligence Team. They've just published a major investigation into previously undocumented cyber espionage group that they're tracking under the name TGR-STA-1030. They're calling the overall operation the Shadow Campaigns. Now, before we jump in, I want to give you some context on what we're dealing with. TGR-STA-1030 is a designation where TGR stands for Temporary Threat Group and STA means state aligned. So this is a state-backed hacking crew assessed with high confidence by Unit 42 to be operating out of Asia. The fact that it's still temporary means they have to figure out who this is, try to attribute more things. But anyways, they haven't attributed to a specific country, but let's just say it's the breadcrumbs are pointing in a familiar direction. Just saying. Now, Security Week has noted that the evidence points to China, although Palo Alto stopped short of that direct accusation. So, what did they actually do? Well, over the past year, the group has compromised at least 70 organizations across 37 countries. And to put that into perspective, that means that approximately 1 out of every 5 countries on the planet had a critical breach from the single group in a single year. Yeah, that's like high level stuff. Now, this is compared to, say, SolarWinds breach in terms of scope. If you remember SolarWinds, that was a very, very big deal. It really spread everywhere and quick. Now, the targets are exactly what you'd expect from a nation state espionage operation. They hit 5 national level law enforcement and border control agencies, 3 ministries of finance, government departments focused on trade, natural resources, and diplomacy. They even compromised a nation's parliament and a senior elected official of another country. Now, the countries affected include Brazil, Mexico, Indonesia, Taiwan, Germany, the Czech Republic, Greece, and many more across the Americas, Europe, Asia, and Africa. Now, notably, the US and the UK were not directly compromised, but the researchers suggest the group deliberately stays right under that threshold of drawing too much attention from those countries, which is something we'll see, right? If you don't anger the high players, then there's a higher chance you're going to go by unnoticed. But at this point, they've just hit too many. Now, the attack chains start with phishing emails. It's just a classic initial access strategy. They'd send government recipients an email with lore about a ministry reorganization, and then the link would point to a file hosted on Mega, the New Zealand based file hosting service. Now, clicking the link downloads a zip archive containing something called the Dayu loader that eventually deploys Cobalt Strike. If you guys have been around the channel, Cobalt Strike is something we've I think talked about. I'm pretty sure we have, but it's a legitimate penetration testing tool that has been just heavily abused by threat actors as a command and control framework. Now, beyond phishing, they also exploited known vulnerabilities in Microsoft Exchange, SAP, and Atlassian products to gain the initial access. So, what's really concerning here is the intelligence they were collecting. Unit 42 confirmed that the groups accessed and exfiltrated sensitive data from victim email servers, including financial negotiations and contracts, banking and account information. And this is where there's like just a bunch of red flags going off in my head. critical military related operational updates. They also developed a new Linux kernel rootkit called ShadowGuard for stealthy operations, and they maintained access to several organizations for months. Now, a rootkit is one of those viruses that becomes harder to root out because it gets into the lower level parts of a system. There's also something called a bootkit, which goes even further into the booting sector, and that becomes even harder. You need to do like a wipe and other stuff. But anyways, so here's the geopolitical angle that would just make everything more interesting. The group's activity directly correlated with real world events. During the US government shutdown in October 2025, they started scanning infrastructure across North, Central, and South America. When the Czech president privately met with the Dalai Lama in August 2025, the group ramped up scanning of Czech government systems, the army, police, parliament, and multiple ministries. Now, after Operation Absolute Resolve captured the Venezuelan president in January 2026, they conducted extensive reconnaissance against 140 Venezuelan government IP addresses within days. So not only are they acting and keeping tabs on what's happening at a geopolitical scale, but there seems to be a correlation between their activities and the geopolitical scale. Now, why does this matter to you? Well, the group is still active. Between November and December 2025, they were scanning government infrastructure in 155 countries. CISA has confirmed that they're aware of the group and working with international partners. If you're in government IT, critical infrastructure, or working with organizations in any of the affected countries, this is something to be paying very close attention to. So patch your Exchange servers, patch your Atlassian products, check for any configurations you might need to do, and just be extremely cautious with emails containing links to file hosting services. Now, you can't outright ban, at least depending on the way your organization is set up, you can't always ban all hosting services. But if you can, it might just be worth it to do some more scanning, preventative measures, training, so on and so forth. Now, let's talk about something that should have every IT admin checking their BeyondTrust instances right now. BeyondTrust has disclosed a critical pre authentication remote code execution vulnerability in its remote support and privileged remote access products. That is huge. This is CVE 2026-1731, and it scored a CVSS 9.9. This is just like golden goose territory. Not only is this remote access, but it's remote access and remote code execution. Like, that's just insane. And it's pre-authentication, by the way. So, to give context, Beyond Trust Remote Support is an enterprise remote help tool that IT support teams use to troubleshoot issues on endpoints remotely. Privileged Remote Access is their product for giving IT admins and third party vendors secured controlled access to internal systems. These are tools that are deeply integrated into corporate networks. They're designed to be security gatekeepers. The irony here is that the vulnerability turns that security gatekeeper into a potential open door. So, what's a vulnerability? It's an OS command injection flaw classified as CWE78. An unauthenticated remote attacker can send specially crafted client requests to a vulnerable Beyond Trust instance, and boom, they can execute operating system commands in the context of the site user. No username, no password, no prior access required, no user interaction needed. According to Beyond Trust's own advisory, successful exploitation requires no authentication or user interaction and may lead to system compromise, including unauthorized access, data exfiltration, and service disruption. Now, here's what makes this particularly interesting. This vulnerability was discovered by security researcher Harsh Jaiswal and the Hacktron AI team using AI enabled variant analysis. That's right, AI found this bug. I know I keep bringing up AI, but it's pretty much here. They scanned for patterns similar to previous vulnerabilities and identified approximately 11,000 instances exposed to the internet, with about 8,500 of those being on premises deployments that remain potentially vulnerable if patches aren't applied. This is a great example of AI being used as a shield for defenders, not just a weapon for attackers. Now, why should you care? Well, because Beyond Trust has been targeted before, and the consequences were severe. 2 years ago, Chinese state backed hackers from the Silk Typhoon Group exploited two different Beyond Trust zero days: CVE 2024 12356 and CVE 2024 12686 to breach the US Treasury Department. They stole unclassified information about potential sanctions and other sensitive documents. CISA had to issue an emergency directive giving agencies 1 week to secure their systems. So when Beyond Trust has a vulnerability, threat actors pay attention. The good news is that BeyondTrust already patched SaaS or software as a service customers automatically on February 2nd. But if you're running self hosted instances like some companies do or some entities do, then this is a manual patch situation. You need to apply patch BT 26 02 RS for remote support or BT 26 02 PRA for privileged remote access through your appliance interface. So if you're running the remote support older than version 21.3 or the PRA older than 22.1, you'll need to upgrade first. Beyond Trust has confirmed there's no known active exploitation yet, but with 8,500 on prem instances exposed and the history of these products being targeted, you should update your stuff. A patch does you no good if it isn't installed. As well, we've been seeing major turnaround for end day CVEs because what's happening essentially is this stuff is being thrown out. Hey, patch this up. You can look at a patch and use that to reverse engineer what that vulnerability was found. And anyone who hasn't patched their instance, well, that's pretty much just a quote unquote free target for these attackers. So patch your stuff. All right. So moving on to something I think is really important for everyone listening to understand because this one hits different. Now, Germany's Federal Office for the Protection of the Constitution, that's the BFV, their domestic intelligence agency, along with the Federal Office for Information Security, the BSI, have issued a joint advisory warning people about a phishing campaign targeting Signal users. And the targets aren't random people. They're going after politicians, military officials, diplomats, and investigative journalists across Germany and Europe. Now, here's what makes this story fascinating and, for better or worse, really clever on the attacker's part. There's no malware involved. There are no software vulnerabilities being exploited, zero days. And the attackers are abusing legitimate features of Signal itself to hijack accounts. So let me explain how this works. There are two versions of the attack. In the first, the attacker contacts the target inside Signal, pretending to be Signal support or a Signal security chatbot. They send an urgent message claiming there's a security issue with the account and the user needs to provide their Signal PIN or take some action to secure their account. If the target hands over the PIN, the attacker can register the account on their own device, effectively locking the real user out and gaining full access to their messages, contacts, and group chats. Now, the second method is even sneakier. It abuses Signal's device linking feature. You know, the QR code you scan when you want to link your Signal to like a desktop computer? Well, the attacker sends a malicious QR code disguised as a legitimate group invitation or security verification. If the target scans it, the attacker's device gets linked to the victim's account, and they can silently read every message going forward without the victim even knowing their account was compromised. This is a textbook example of why I always say security is about the person and the tech. The encryption in Signal is solid. Nobody's breaking that. But it doesn't matter how strong your encryption is if someone tricks you into handing over the keys. Security by obscurity does not work. And in this case, even security by encryption doesn't work if the human element fails. Now, while German authorities haven't made a definitive attribution, the tactic closely aligns with the Russian linked threat groups like Star Blizzard, UNC 5792, and UNC 4221, which have all been observed targeting secure messaging platforms as part of the intelligence operations focused on NATO aligned countries and their military and diplomatic personnel. So, what should you do? Well, first, never respond to any message from quote unquote Signal support accounts. Signal doesn't contact users directly through the app. So, block and report the accounts immediately. Second is never share your PIN with anyone, period. Third is enable registration locks under settings, then account. This requires your PIN for any new device registration. And fourth, and this is something that everyone should do right now, go to settings, then link devices, and review what's connected to your account. If you see anything you don't recognize, just remove it immediately. The authorities also warn that this technique can be extended to WhatsApp, which has a similar device linking and PIN features. All right. So this next story is about policy, but don't tune it out because this one has real teeth and it connects directly to everything we've been talking about. So on February 5th, CISA, the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency, issued Binding Operation Directive 26-02, mitigating risk from end of support edge devices. To give context, edge devices are the hardware that sit at the boundary of your network. Think like firewalls, routers, switches, wireless access points, load balancers, IoT devices, network security applications, pretty much anything that isn't necessarily a desktop computer and sits out on a periphery. These are the front doors and windows of your digital building. And end of support means the manufacturer has stopped providing security updates for them. So imagine having a front door that the locksmith just refuses to fix anymore, and you're hoping nobody tries to pick it, but then suddenly everyone has a key to it, and the locksmith won't fix it. So CISA's directive is pretty straightforward but aggressive. So federal civilian agencies are now required to immediately update any edge devices that can be updated. Within 3 months, they have to inventory everything on CISA's end of support edge device list. Within 12 months, decommission everything that's already past its support date. And within 18 months, all identified end of support edge devices must be fully replaced. And within 24 months, agencies need a continuous discovery process in place to catch devices approaching end of support before they can become a problem. Now, Nick Anderson, CISA's executive assistant director for cybersecurity, said on the press call that attackers targeting these devices include those with ties to nation states. And that shouldn't surprise anyone. We've seen China, specifically Chinese and Russian threat actors, repeatedly targeting edge devices from companies like Fortinet, Ivanti, Barracuda, and Palo Alto, sometimes with 0 days, sometimes with end day exploits on unpatched systems. And end day being the vulnerability that's been exposed, and whether vendors have patched it or not, it's already known. So these devices are attractive because they sit at the network perimeter. They're accessible from the internet and they often integrate with identity management systems. If you pop an edge device, you're halfway into the kingdom. Now, this directive technically only applies to federal civilian agencies, but CISA acting director put it bluntly. Unsupported devices pose a serious risk to federal systems and should never remain on enterprise networks. That's advice everyone should be following. So if you're running edge devices that are past end of supporting your organization, you're carrying unnecessary risk. This is the update your stuff mantra, but taken to its logical conclusion. If you can't update it because the vendor won't provide updates, well, time to get a new one. All right, let's segment into our last story. And this one is a fascinating case study in how ransomware groups operate and how initial claims don't always match reality. So, the Everest Ransomware Gang, a Russian linked group that's been active since 2021, posted on their dark web leak site claiming they breached Iron Mountain, the massive S&P 500 information management company. Now, they claimed 1.4 terabytes of stolen data, including internal documents and client information, and set a February 11th deadline for compliance with their demands. Now, if you're not familiar with Iron Mountain, they're one of the biggest data storage and information management companies on the planet. They serve over 225,000 customers worldwide, including, according to their website, 95% of companies listed on the Fortune 1000. They guard everything from physical records to digital backups, intellectual property, even master recordings for movie studios and music labels. So when a ransomware groups claim they breached the vault, that gets everyone's attention. So Everest shared screenshots on their leak site showing folder names that appear to reference customer accounts, marketing materials, and research documents. Show a taste of what you have to create urgency without actually releasing the data. They did not release any downloadable files, which is common when groups are still trying to pressure the victims into paying. But here's where it gets interesting. Iron Mountain responded, and their story is significantly different from whatever is claimed. According to the company, a single compromised login credential was used to access one folder on a third party, public facing file sharing site. The folder contained primarily marketing materials shared with third party vendors. No ransomware was deployed, no Iron Mountain core systems were breached, no customer confidential or sensitive information was involved. They deactivated the compromised credential and said that's the extent of it. Now, is Iron Mountain downplaying it? Possibly. That's always a risk with self reported breach scope. But the fact that Everest only shared a screenshot of folder names, not actual data samples, and that 1.4 terabytes of marketing materials from a single folder on a file sharing site is a stretch. It does lend to some credibility to Iron Mountain's version of the events. Now, here's where the lesson is twofold. First, even a single compromised credential can create a headline. That is why credential hygiene matters. Multi factor authentication, unique passwords, regular rotation, especially for any account that touches external facing services. And second, ransomware groups exaggerate. It's just part of their business model. If they can create more pressure, more hype, they want to create the maximum amount of fear to extract the maximum payout. Now, always verify the actual scope of a breach before reacting to threat actor claims. The 1% will click, and apparently the 1% of credentials will get compromised too. So, to kind of do a wrap up and just some key takeaways from today's episode, nation state espionage is operating at an unprecedented scale. The TGR STA 1030 compromised 70 organizations in 37 countries in 1 year. So patch your public facing appliances, applications, so on and so forth, especially Exchange, SAP, and Atlassian products, and be hyper vigilant about phishing emails with links to file hosting services. Update your BeyondTrust instances immediately if you have them. CVE 2026-1731 is a CVSS 9.9 pre-authentication RCE. It's like the double golden goose of everything. And with 8,500 on-prem instances exposed to the internet, it's only a matter of time before threat actors start targeting this. The chances of all 8,500 patching it immediately is not that high. A patch does you no good if it's not installed. Encryption doesn't protect you from social engineering. The Signal phishing campaign proves that even the most secure messaging platform is only as strong as the person using it. Enable registration lock, review your linked devices, and never share your PIN with anyone. And honestly, that can be applied to almost anything. Check what devices are linked to any account, and so on and so forth. Now, end of life devices are open invitations for attackers. CISA's new directive should be a wake up call for everyone, not just federal agencies. If your edge devices aren't getting security updates, they need to be replaced. Now, nothing is hack proof, but running unsupported hardware is just making it that much easier for an attacker. Now, verify before you panic. The Iron Mountain incident shows that ransomware groups exaggerate to maximize leverage. A single compromised credential on a file sharing site became a 1.4 terabyte breach in the headlines. Credential hygiene and multi factor authentication remain your first line of defense. As always, remember security is a combination of the person and the tech. You can have the best tools in the world, but if you're not staying informed, staying patched, staying vigilant, and you're leaving doors open, well, that's how threat actors can get in. And that's what they're counting on, honestly. So, thank you guys for tuning in to HN episode 61. If you found this episode valuable, share it with someone who needs to hear it, a coworker, a friend, anyone who touches a computer, really. This has been your host, cipherceval, and I'll catch you in the next one.